There we go. Oh,
If everyone could please take their seats, we want to move ahead.
all right.
Hi, everybody. If we could just get your attention back. Okay. I'm going to introduce Howard Lipoff, who is the Secretary of New Jersey Peace Action Board of Directors, and he will move on with the next part of the program. Thanks. Thank you. And I'll be very brief because we're very excited today to have our guest speaker. John Nichols is somebody that many of us have been reading his commentary for years in The Nation and the progressive magazines. He's also been a frequent guest on Democracy Now!, on MSNBC, and other television programs. He's written numerous books, such as The Genius of Impeachment. It seems more genius than ever each day. And his most recent book, The Horsemen of the, I hope I said
Trumpocalypse.
Yeah, it's a hard word for me to say, the Trumpocalypse. Both of these books are being sold in the table to the right. After the presentation, we've got quite a number of books still available. You can purchase one today. The first time that John Nichols really came to my attention after I'd been reading him for a number of years is when the first time I saw him speaking in person. It was at the Left Forum a number of years ago when he was speaking about his activism and the activism of many people in his home state of Wisconsin. There was a horrendous attack by right-wing forces on public sector employees, and he was part of the leadership of that movement fighting back. It's for this, that, for all his writings over the years, all his encouragement for peace and activism, that we today are presenting John Nichols with the Hope Shapiro Bread and Roses Award for his relentless pursuit of truth and the cause of global peace and justice. Please welcome John Nichols.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to have shared probably the best dessert buffet I have ever seen at a peace action event. In the Midwest, where I come from, we are very austere. If you get a couple of crackers, right? That's it. Come to New Jersey, and it's this incredible. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a feast. It's beyond comprehension.
We have a very generous Italian bakery.
You have a very generous Italian bakery. You have a very generous peace action culture. You have given me a Bread and Roses Award in the place where bread and roses came from the great strikes of more than 100 years ago. I could not be more honored. And you have given me a chance to do what I do all the time, which is travel around this country and say that while we have movements on many, many issues, all of them important, we never diminish any struggle. The fact of the matter is that the most vital of all struggles is the struggle to give people the chance to live in peace. And peace action has never lost sight of that extraordinary goal.
Yeah.
And I look out over this room room, this is fantastic. Look at you. This is, every year I do an event for a peace action group somewhere. And I have done it in Massachusetts and in Wisconsin and Minnesota and around. This is a fantastic turnout, a fantastic crowd, and I gotta tell you, not to, I'm not casting aspersions politically one way or the other, but Chairman Mao, of all people, a very long, not a pacifist, I might add, but he said a long time ago, they said, well, how did you change the tide of China? He said, if we had 3 people in every village who were committed to do the work, we would prevail. And the fact of the matter is, I'm looking on the side of peace now. I'm looking at New Jersey. I'm seeing a lot more than 3, and I've got a feeling that we are on the course for something amazing. Thank you for turning out in such great numbers for Jeff and for this wonderful group. I want to pay tribute right up front to a few people. Jeff, I work with a lot of people on a lot of causes all over this country. And I just want to tell you, you have an executive director in Jeff who is so genial, so humane, and also so committed, and on top of it, you are very, very lucky. You are very blessed to have Jeff as your executive director. I want to also pay a tribute to Judith, because she is such a warm and good soul. And the fact of the matter is, nothing good has ever come from being the head of a board of any organization. It is never easy, and I'm not trying to make it hard for you to recruit, but the fact of the matter is, it's never easy, right? You gotta go to meetings, you gotta beg people for money, you gotta go to meetings, you gotta beg people for money, you gotta go to meetings, it's a pretty repetitive, it's sort of a Groundhog's Day sort of job. But those who take those positions, I always pay tribute to them, because at the end of the day, they are the people who keep organizations functional and alive. They recruit the next generation and the next generation. Peace Action is older than I am, which is astounding. But it started as saying, but it's older than many people in this room. And the reason that Peace Action has lasted from the Eisenhower era to the lesser era, the reason that Peace Action has survived is because people like Judith step up and take charge of local and state organizations across this country. And so great tribute to her, and great tribute to your whole group. Let me also shout out, I think he's still here, to James Lee, or James Yee, I apologize, James Yee in the back there, the great chaplain from Guantanamo, who you saw on Amy Goodman's show, and who was such a wonderful figure in calling things out. He lives in your community and is such a part of what you do. A heroic figure who says, oh, I just did my job. And it's always, whenever somebody says, I just did my job, that's the person who really deserves the Medal of Honor. And so thank you, James, for being with us today. Finally, let me give a tribute just for a moment to Alfred Meyer, who's over here with us. Alfred's been for years with Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I knew him in Madison, Wisconsin. He's now out here on the East Coast. But I just want to emphasize that Physicians for Social Responsibility, an allied group with Peace Action on so many issues, and a group that actually brings the doctors to the table, which is often very good for fundraising. And so Alfred's just been a wonderful figure, and truly somebody who gets the basic concept of this connectivity between economic and social and racial justice, saving the planet, and peace. Please, an honor to Alfred. I work for The Nation magazine. We don't fundraise with dinners. Well, we do now and again, but we actually fundraise with some cruise, right, that takes us out into the ocean. where we then throw overboard the disbelievers. And I just want to say that the Carlsons up front here are two of our loyalist members of our cruise family, and I have spent more time with them than anyone but my born relatives, and so I'm very honored to have two of your people from the community here who've been great supporters of this. All right, now I'm going to work my way from table to table and compliment everybody here, including your former Senate candidate, your former Marilyn. Where's Marilyn, by the way?
Madeline.
Madeline, I apologize. Madeline, there's Madeline in the back. Just want to say, for a brief moment in 1996, when the Green Party didn't have a candidate to put on the ballot in New Jersey, they put Madeline on as their nominee for president. And I still hold to the view that we lost our best possible president ever when she stood down off that top floor. But wonderful, long-time ally of the organization. So we gathered today for a little discussion. I'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll take question and answer. And your Q&A is going to be by far the best and the brightest part of our discussion. I guarantee you that. But let me offer a few thoughts up front. And first, let me join in the tribute to Tom Bias. Wonderful songwriter. And I love that Judith was like I didn't know what a winter soldier was. And that is that speaks to how we teach history in America. But the fact of the matter is that the term winter soldier has a dual meaning, dual reference, which is of immense significance for peace action. And it was a phrase, it's actually a kind of a variant on what Tom Paine actually wrote. Paine wrote a slightly different storyline, but it was at the start of the American Revolution. And remember, this was Paine's territory here. He wandered around. Tom Paine never really had a home, right? He said he was a citizen of the world, and he was always someplace trying to foment revolution, trying to convince people to rise up and fight against some terrible, ignoble force. King of Britain, King of France, the slaveholders in Haiti, all the bad players of the world. Tom Paine was always the first to call them out and to tell them that he wanted to get rid of them. And in his wonderful, wonderful pamphlet, Common Sense, he called the American people into revolution itself. And then with his American Crisis, he called them to carry forward at a point when they were hunkered down in, of course, New Jersey, and it was such an awful winter, and they were about ready to give up on things, and he said, no, you can't give up on this thing. And he wrote his wonderful statement, which was, these are the times that try men's souls. We always remember that. We think Shakespeare wrote it. Right? But these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriots will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of every man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation for us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. It was this message that George Washington had read to the troops at Valley Forge as a message that they had to carry forward, that they could not give up on this struggle against the tyranny of colonialism and imperialism. And the interesting thing about that wonderful speech, and that is what a winter soldier is. It is the person who carries on when the struggle is at its weakest, is at its worst. But it is also the suggestion that this person is the highest patriot. Now, where this fast-forwarded into the modern era was in the early 1970s, when Vietnam veterans, and we have some people here today from Veterans for Peace, and let us give a loud round of applause for Veterans for Peace. Let us honor them for all of their work, but especially for their efforts to reclaim Armistice Day, to say that it isn't Veterans Day, it is Armistice Day. It is what was intended as a day to celebrate the end of war, certainly to honor those who have served, but mostly to honor the fact that there would be no more war. But Veterans for Peace traces a lot of its roots back to the vets from Vietnam who came home, and when they arrived back, so many of them had been so scarred by what they had seen. They had often gone as farm kids and factory workers and small town folks from across this country with great idealism, with a great sense of what patriotism was. And they'd gone to serve, as so many folks who have served over so many years in so many wars have. And what they saw horrified them. What they came to recognize was that they were fighting in a struggle. They were fighting in a struggle that need not be fought. That they were actually not doing what the founders of the American experiment would have wanted them to do. And so these folks came back, and they became active members, often leaders, of the anti-war movement. And in 1971, when John Kerry and other decorated veterans of the Vietnam War gathered in Washington to put the war on trial and to put Richard Nixon on trial for perpetuating that war after he had been elected, saying that he had a secret plan to end it. When they sought to put Richard Nixon on trial, they declared their effort the Winter Soldier Project. They borrowed from Paine, and they said that their service as soldiers was not finished until they ended the war that they should not have had to fight. And so the term Winter Soldier is a term of peace and pacifist action, of ending wars that need not be fought. And so Tom Bias today has been honored with one of the greatest of all titles that you could give anyone. I honor Tom Bias as well.
Yes.
This is actually a very notable weekend. We mark our anniversaries. It is appropriate to mark anniversaries. It is valid because it's a way of teaching history and reminding us where we have been and where we are headed. 50 years ago this weekend, November 15th and 16th, in Washington, D.C., the largest anti-war demonstration in the history of the United States was held outside the Capitol and outside the White House. It was the Vietnam Moratorium, and the Vietnam Moratorium was a series of demonstrations on October 15th across this country, every town across the country. On November 15th, it was their goal to go to Washington. They brought hundreds of thousands of people to Washington, and we should never, ever forget. We should never, ever forget that at that moment, there was simply no question that the peace movement in this country was a mass movement to which people were deeply committed. And I know that we do this terrible thing to ourselves. We say, oh, well, we didn't totally succeed. We went out there on November 15th, November 16th, 1969, 50 years ago this weekend, and we didn't end the war. The war didn't end. Or we say, oh, we mobilized against the Iraq War in February of 2003, those amazing mass demonstrations across this country and around the world, and oh, we didn't succeed. We didn't avert the war. And the great Central American activists of the 1980s, perhaps arguably one of the greatest anti-war, anti-militarism movements in the modern history of the United States, the incredible activism that we have still seen in recent years against going to war with Iraq, and yet it still keeps perpetuating. We tell ourselves, oh, we didn't succeed. Brothers and sisters, you need to understand, you need to have some sense of perspective. If you had not mobilized in 1969, if you had not mobilized as regards Central America, if you had not mobilized as regards Iraq and Iran, if you didn't hold those vigils that you now hold, if you did not do that, I promise you that war and militarism and imperialism would be so dramatically stronger. This world, I would dare to say, might well have been destroyed had you not gone out and struggled and fought, sometimes against incredible odds, sometimes with very few allies, but you went, and your peace activism has always succeeded. It has always prevailed in preventing that which would have been dramatically worse. I don't have rose-colored glasses, brothers and sisters. I see very clearly. We need peace activists every single day, and the work that New Jersey Peace Action does is a part of a whole that is so incredibly vital for all of us. So I thank you for that. But let me also do something else. And this is why you're going to want to disinvite me. You're going to want to say, oh, you know, he was great when he was telling us how cool we were. Do you know what the worst part about peace activists is? Aside from their sanctimonious always being right. Which is a funny thing. If you oppose a war, you're almost certainly going to turn out right. But the funny thing about peace activists is that they're like everybody else. Pretty much normal people. And so most of us, when we start in a kind of activism, we start where we are, and we learn it in that moment. We learn what we're opposed to. We learn kind of a basic perspective. It's normal. I do it. You know, I mean, it's funny that we marry, we have kids, and all that, and then we look at it and we think, oh wow, I didn't, you know, I still always reference to where I started this process. I remember the little girl. I remember my wife when we got married. You know, we remember where we came from, and we live our life kind of moving from there. But sometimes, brothers and sisters, we have to stop and say, yeah, so many of us became activists to stop a war in Vietnam. Others of us became activists to stop the horrific U.S. violence in Central America in the 1980s. Others of us became activists coming through other causes, perhaps to end apartheid in South Africa, for a host of other issues, to be union organizers, all these things. But we come at a certain time, and that's much of what we know. For peace activists, that is often the case. And I come to you today to put two issues on your agenda, to say that it is time to pause, recognize that all of the struggles and all of the challenges that existed still exist, but also to recognize that there are new challenges that are daunting, and we have to get ahead of them. And just two, I won't overwhelm you. The first of these is the militarization of space. This is a huge, huge issue. I know, and I don't think I've actually mentioned him yet, so I mean, I think I don't want to overemphasize. You know, I know we're in a church, but President Trump. I know that President Trump often seems to be a buffoonish, cruel, useless, selfish, self-absorbed,
lazy,
awful, indefensible, incompetent, lazy, lying, misogynist, sexist, racist, yeah, xenophobe. I do recognize all of these things. And I realize the way that we often look at him. But I will tell you something else. He is something amazing, almost unprecedented in our history. He is the repository of all bad ideas. If there was a terrible idea that other people said, oh yeah, let's not do that, Donald Trump is the person who says, oh yeah, let's do that. And one of the things that Donald Trump has done, and this is a truly indefensible act, he has treated Newt Gingrich with respect. And Newt Gingrich is just a buffoon. You know, he's a ridiculous, ridiculous man. And not even the nicest person, as many of his ex-wives will tell you. But Newt Gingrich has been obsessed for a very, very long time, with a handful of other people, with militarizing space. Newt Gingrich actually proposed that we colonize Mars and make it a state. And I understand why he was thinking that. He actually proposed using the Northwest Territory model. I write about this in the book because it's one of my favorite concepts. And it was this idea that you'd use the standards of bringing new states in, and if people started to colonize the moon and Mars and places like that, they could become states. And I know why he was in favor of this, because he was looking for some place where he could actually win an election. But Newt Gingrich is obsessed with this stuff. And one of the things that he and some of his allies have been obsessed with is ending the most successful anti-war initiative of the post-World War II era. No, that's pretty amazing. The most successful anti-war initiative of the post-World War II era was a series of treaties which the United States agreed to, as well as other countries, major countries, nuclear powers, to keep weapons out of space. To not allow the commercial exploitation of outer space and to not allow the weaponization of outer space. This is huge stuff because I don't know, I don't want to shock any of our listeners here, but we have moved into a modern era where it is actually possible to travel to other planets. We don't do it that often because it costs a lot of money, and we have left it largely in the domain of the public sector, serving hopefully some, figuring out how to create tame, right? Or other, doing something useful. But the Trump administration, one guy sitting over there going, I had tame when I was a kid. But the Trump administration has moved aggressively in the area of potentially militarizing outer space. And Donald Trump, now this is the good news, Donald Trump has put Mike Pence in charge of this. And Mike Pence is a scorching incompetent who cannot do anything right. And so it's good news on that regard. But Mike Pence is in charge of the Space Corps, right? This whole idea of literally creating a new section of the military related to outer space. Now, I know we can laugh about this because it involves Mike Pence, but I want to emphasize to you, Peace Action and other peace groups, FCNL, all these good groups across this country, have got to get serious about this. This is a big deal, and we need to shore up, renew, and maintain our space treaties to make sure that we don't let any weaponry get into an outer space situation. Because once that happens, yes, demilitarized space, it's a big deal. Because once that happens, once one weapon is there, I promise you that everything you have known up to this day about nuclear war, about militarism, everything that you've known up to this day will be dramatically more horrifying. Because if you can rain terror from the skies, if you have the ability to colonize a planet and use it as a way station for aiming weaponry back at this planet, that gives you so much power over this planet that it is something that wealthy and powerful people will want. I cannot emphasize, this is a big issue, and it needs to be paid great attention to. The second issue I'm going to put on your table, and this is one that I think many of you know, and I know that I come to groups full of brilliant people who often know the issues already. But the other one is the weaponization, the militarization of the Arctic. And this is an area where, Jeff mentioned briefly the importance of climate justice groups working with peace groups. This is where, there's so many areas, and everything Jeff said was right about fossil fuels, but this is where it really comes to a head. I don't know if you've been reading the news recently, but we're melting the planet, right? We are literally burning the planet. And as this planet melts, the ice cap, the polar ice cap, and all of the north, really the Arctic region, is in radical transformation. This transformation is literally melting, right? They're losing the ice cap. Whole sections of the north are transforming in radical ways. A friend of mine is the Prime Minister of Iceland, Katrín Jakobsdóttir. She recently wrote an essay for the New York Times in which she wrote an obituary for a glacier, right? And for ice. And she said, something that has existed from before recorded time is gone from my country, from Iceland. It melted. This is happening all over the north. As this happens, the Arctic, which was once essentially landlocked, it was landlocked by ice. It wasn't really land, but it was a place you couldn't move through, except in those old, incredible stories of people with, sled dogs going, through the horrors. Now, as it melts, and as you have water there rather than ice, it becomes possible to transport goods across parts of the Arctic Circle, and more possible each day. as this happens, commercial interests and the fossil fuel companies and everyone are going to be moving into that part of the world in an incredibly aggressive way. And coming with them will be massive militarization. One of the primary focuses of our Pentagon today is the militarization of the Arctic. Our Pentagon is very focused on that, and it's not because there's bad people per se. Actually, the Pentagon is one of the truest researchers of climate change. They actually do a good job of recording it. But our Pentagon is interested in this because the Russians are interested in this, and because the Chinese are interested in this, and because even the Norwegians, who will probably do no harm, and the Canadians, and everybody who is up there is incredibly interested in who's going to control this economic power of being able to transport across the north, and all of the relations that go with that. And we are about to experience an Arctic weapons rush, an Arctic militarization rush, and peace action. Friends Committee on National Legislation, other peace groups, PSR, has to become incredibly sophisticated in this regard. Because once it happens, if you have not stopped it, if you have not prevented it, you will not be able to turn it back. And I will tell you that once it happens, there will be people who, despite what they say publicly, will delight in the reality of climate change because it will make them richer and more powerful. And so you need to align with climate justice groups. You need to align with indigenous peoples who live in the north. You need to align with the governments of peace-loving countries in the north. And you need to recognize that none of this is up to chance. None of the weird things that happen are as weird as you think. When Donald Trump said that he was interested in buying Greenland, that wasn't a joke. Donald Trump was interested in buying Greenland. And in fact, this was not, people who know these issues weren't laughing. Yes, Donald Trump always is worth a good laugh. But in this case, the talk of the United States buying Greenland, a sovereign region of Denmark with indigenous peoples who have lived there throughout history, the idea of the United States buying that was to get position in the Arctic and to get ahead of the Chinese who have actually moved very strongly into there. I can't tell you, I promise you, listen to me, do what you do. Go home tonight and Google, just Google Arctic and militarization. You will step into a whole new world of struggle that we have to be dramatically ahead of. Now, have I bummed you out a little? I hope you're a little bummed out, because the fact of the matter is, if we're talking about weaponization of space, and we're talking about weaponization of the Arctic, and we're talking about all the stuff we always had to fight on, you might even say, you know what? I'm sorry I went to the peace action event in Montclair to hear this guy speak, because instead of being pepped up and made happy, I ended up thinking I got two more things I gotta have nightmares about tonight. And I understand that you can be a little bit, dubious, scared, as someone said. Okay, so this is the reason you actually invited me. Because I come to bring you good news. In fact, I come to bring you the best news I could ever deliver to a group of economic and social and racial justice, planet justice, peace, and diplomacy activists. I come to bring you the best news that anybody could ever give you. The cavalry has arrived. Not the cavalry, not the militarized cavalry, the cavalry you needed. And this is a big deal. I do a national podcast called Next Left. I interview people who are young elected officials across this country. We've done stuff, I've done interviews in recent months with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and so many of these other figures who have come in. And last week, in fact, Thursday night, we did a long interview with Bernie Sanders that'll go up on Tuesday. And I gotta tell you, Bernie Sanders sends greetings to peace action, because he actually thinks this group is a great value. But last week, about a week ago, in fact, a week ago today, I interviewed Barbara Lee. Now, Barbara Lee, you know, this is about the only member of Congress we can actually mention in a Catholic church. Because she actually, you know, did the right thing. It was indeed related to her Catholicism. The interesting thing of it is that Barbara Lee, after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, she was there in Washington. You got all this horror, all this tragedy, and she jumped on a bus to go to a prayer service at the National Cathedral, and she came back then, and amazingly, this is how they do things in Washington. After you're at the National Cathedral praying and, you know, honoring the Prince of Peace, the Nazarene, whatever religious tradition you come from, then you head back to declare war. And that's what happened, right? They came back from this prayer service, and they said to Congress, oh, by the way, we're all mourning, and this has been a horrible thing and an immense tragedy, one of the worst things to ever befall our country. And by the way, now we have to give Dick Cheney a blank check to launch wars wherever he wants. And the entire United States Senate, we have to be honest about this, every single member of the United States Senate, including liberal Democrats who we respect, the entire United States Senate said, oh, that's right, got to give Dick Cheney whatever he wants. Tell him to go ahead. And the entire U.S. House of Representatives, every member of the U.S. House of Representatives, including some of the most progressive and liberal and really decent people there, all said, oh, something horrible, this is too much for us. We can't hold the wall. We're going to give Dick Cheney a blank check to launch every war he wants in every corner of the world. Yeah, we know he's got maps of Iraq with where the oil is. We know he's a former oil industry guy who literally looks at the world, not for some noble purpose to respond to an attack, not to defend people, but at the world as a place where all of his visions, all of his obsessions might come to play. And they voted to give him that blank check. And one woman, one African-American woman from the Bay Area in California, a woman who had worked in a Black Panther breakfast program, a woman who had worked with Ron Dellums, the greatest chairman of the House Armed Services Committee we ever had, a woman who had come up through the peace movement. One woman, Barbara Lee, stood up and said, I vote no. I am not going to give Dick Cheney that authorization to launch endless wars. She is an absolute hero to the American experience, not to the peace movement, to the whole of what we are. You have a sign out front that says, stop the endless wars. Well, that's what Barbara Lee tried to do. And I interviewed her the other day. It was a fabulous conversation because she is the most charming, lovely, easygoing, good-spirited, unstopped person you're going to meet. Nothing slows her down. She is filled with commitment, but she has fought alone for decade after decade. She cast that vote, and they told her she was finished. She had ended her career. And then those wonderful signs started appearing in windows and on the back, bumper stickers on the backs of cars. Barbara Lee speaks for me. And it turned out, the tens of millions of Americans were on her side. She wasn't alone. But yet she was so often alone in Congress. And each year, each session of Congress, she would try to end the authorization of the use of military force. Right? Not the one against Iraq, which also was another problem, but she would try to end the initial one that was used as an excuse for that war, Tom Bias' song about Afghanistan, and has been used. You realize they've been still using that for Syria. They use that for whatever they want, decade after decade, to send us into more and more wars. Presidents see it as a blank check, Democratic and Republican presidents. And Barbara Lee has consistently stepped up and worked. She has gone to the most conservative Republicans. She has gone to people she disagrees with on every issue. She's gone to people that she actually, who have no respect for her. And she still sat with them and said, please, at least side with me on this, right? At least work with me on this issue. And she's built this coalition in Congress. It's quite remarkable what she's done. She's got right-wingers even on her side because, there's actually some people, not many of them, who when they rant and rave about, too much spending, actually understand that the place where we spend the worst amount of money and the overwhelming amounts is on the Pentagon and on these endless wars. And yet, by and large, Barbara Lee's pretty much been on her own. When I interviewed her the other day, she said, I never feel lonely anymore. So I look around. Now I got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying, we're opposed to militarism. We're opposed to imperialism. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling out the coup in Bolivia before people asked her to do it because she recognized it for what it was. She's got Rashida Tlaib, who says, yeah, you want to talk about Israel-Palestine? Let's talk about it. As a Palestinian Muslim woman serving in the Congress of the United States, she has Ilhan Omar, a refugee, young woman who fled her own country at the age of 8, lived in a refugee camp into her teens, came to the United States of America, worked nights at the post office in Minneapolis, graduated from North Dakota State University, and came back and became a political activist in Minneapolis, and now, as a Somali refugee who came to this country, serves in the United States Congress. And she does so as a militant opponent of imperialism, as a militant opponent of militarism, who comes to Barbara Lee and says, sister, what are we going to do today? How are we going to struggle on this regard? Barbara Lee's not alone anymore. And she's got Ro Khanna with her, the great new congressman from California. I got to tell you, that Ro Khanna, this guy, his grandfather was jailed with Gandhi. Was jailed struggling with Gandhi. I don't know if they're in the same cell. But you understand, when he talks about imperialism, he gets it. When he talks about colonialism, he gets it. When he talks about militarism, he gets it. He literally grew up in a family that said, yeah, well, what did Gandhi say? And his grandfather said, well, he said this, because I was with him. And the fact of the matter is, we now have people in the Congress of the United States, not as many as we want, not as many as we need, but we've got a caucus now that is ready to take the issues of peace action, ready to take the issues of the peace movement and make them part of the governance and politics of this country. And the fact of the matter is, you have never had it so good. This is really a big deal. And next month, in December, Ilhan Omar, I believe with some cooperation from Ro Khanna and some others, will initiate their plan, they will put forward their plan for the foreign policy equivalent of a Green New Deal. And their argument is that just as we need a Green New Deal to deal with climate change, to deal with jobs issues, to deal with automation, with everything that's going on in our society, we also need a New Deal for foreign policy that recognizes that our future cannot be locked into ever-increasing military budgets. Our future cannot be tied to ever-expanding imperialism. Our future cannot be tied to a vision of endless war, that we have to dial it back and say that this country will stand as John Adams, one of our first secretaries of state, said it should. Not as a country searching the world for monsters to destroy, but a country that, while it encourages social justice, while it encourages economic justice, knows that it is not the job of this country to be the policeman of the world, and knows that it is not the job of this country to look around the planet for wars to engage in. It is the job of this country to close the bases down, bring the troops home, cut that military budget, and start to move that money over to human needs that are so pressing in this republic. That is the foreign policy equivalent of the Green New Deal. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, you go fight for that Green New Deal, but you fight for this change as well. And we have the prospect of transforming this republic into what it should always have been. The truth of the matter is, this country, for all of its failures, for all of its flaws. This country was founded in revolution against colonial power. This country was founded in revolt against an imperial power. Yes, imperfect people. Yes, flawed people. But one of them was Tom Paine. And Tom Paine, you know, I got to tell you, this is what a geek I am. Last night I was in New York City. I was in Greenwich Village. I went down, there's a little side street in Greenwich Village. There's a little plaque there, the place where Tom Paine died. Tom Paine died in 1808. Unnoted. He was the generator of the American Revolution, the guy who conceptualized it. He was also an immigrant and a labor organizer. He was forced to leave Great Britain because he had helped to organize a union of tax collectors. And so they made him, he had to, I know, not a bad idea. And so they forced him to leave. He arrived on a ship in Philadelphia in 1774. He was so sick they had to carry him off the ship. And they dumped him in a flop house in Philadelphia. So understand this. An immigrant forced to leave because he was a radical organizer, arriving sick and diseased, and he was thrown in a flop house. Within a couple months, he was writing for a paper in Philadelphia suggesting the idea of revolution against the British Crown. And that revolutionary also, in that period, almost unique to the founders, one of the rare ones among the founders, said, by the way, if we're really for freedom, if we're really for liberty, how can we hold slaves? How can there be human bondage in this place? Because if it is indeed a revolution for an Enlightenment vision, then you must also end slavery. And you must also end the pernicious influence of the church. We have to have religious pluralism. We have to recognize Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, all of the religious traditions, not to say that we will be a country that follows one tradition. And because of this, Tom Paine was marginalized as a leader. He was pushed aside. By the time Tom Paine died, none of his allies from the American Revolution would dare to stand at his side. None of them would go to his funeral. He was buried in New York City with a handful of people. 5, 6 people were there in a tiny little funeral. But several of the people there were African Americans, freedmen. And they came because they said they wanted to honor the one founder who had opposed slavery. The one founder who had known what this country needed to be.